everybody, and welcome to the PharmAla Investor Webinar here Friday, February the 2nd. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm Nick Kadish. I'm the CEO of PharmAla Biotech, and with me is Shane Morris, our COO. We're going to talk about some of the recent developments in the company. We're going to take some questions. I think this webinar is going to go for between 30 and 45 minutes. We're going to spend about 15 minutes talking about some of the major moves that we've made as a company in the last week, 2 weeks, some of the things that are coming up in the next little while. And then we'll take a whole bunch of questions from folks, because I know that there's a lot out there. If you want, you can start submitting your questions through the webinar function, and we will get to them as soon as we've done our piece and talked about our stuff. So maybe I'll kick it off. Shane, you want to talk a little bit about the controlled substance license that PharmAla got? Because I think that's it's a big piece for us. I know we've been working on it for a long time. Maybe I'll just let you talk about that a little bit, because that was your big project.
Yeah, certainly it was a big team effort. We obtained the license very recently, and it was really a first for Health Canada, in a way that you have to remember. On the MDMA side, this definitely does not have a DIN, which is drug identification number, and it was certainly a product that was needed, especially in the special access program. And as a result, leveraging the relatively recent changes in Health Canada's regulatory elements around the special access program, we were then able to obtain essentially what we call it, a dealer's license. At that point, it allows us to be able to talk to prescribers, interact more in the value chain than would normally be allowed with a controlled substance like MDMA. So certainly, it has opened up some avenues for us in a very novel way to have those discussions here in Canada specifically. But it also allows, it gives some credence to us internationally as well to be licensed by Health Canada. And hats off to Health Canada, has to be said. I'm often very critical of Health Canada as an ex-bureaucrat, but certainly, they saw the need for this for patients. They put a patient-first approach and worked with us on this issue, and it was certainly something I think that will go a long way to helping patients in need that have this requirement for MDMA treatment.
Yeah, I mean, look, we often say that we're a regulatory first organization, but I think it's fair to say that hasn't stopped us from criticizing some of the things that Health Canada has done in the past. But really hats off to them, like really collaborative relationship, really open to sort of new ideas and new ways of doing things. And that's rare for a regulator. So I think really full credit to Health Canada on this and how they've been approaching psychedelics over the last year and a half.
Yeah, I think we've certainly seen some changes in attitude, and certainly some, like I say, nice and refreshing to see a patient-first approach here.
Totally. The other major thing that happened just this Monday was we released our Q1 financials, and for the first time in the company's history, we managed to show a profit. I can't know 100% because there's a lot of private companies, of course, as well, who don't release their financials. But as far as we know at this time, first psychedelics company to show a profit in any quarter. So we're pretty proud about that.
Yeah, I think certainly it has been an interesting quarter. A lot of heavy lifting in relation to putting together the value chain and making sure that it's executed well across the board. We certainly, just on the financials, I think certainly we're looking at a market that is quite slow. I think it's fair to say that we're building across the board, and certainly there's a lot of work to be done on that front yet.
Yeah. Look, I think for all of the investors out there, I want to set expectations at the right level, right? Like, it's still a very young industry. We're still a very young company. We're barely 3 years old, and so it's going to be choppy, right? I don't think anybody should expect that it's just going to be like a steep trajectory rise into infinity. But we've seen like a lot of great progress, including, I think just last week, the first MDMA dose that was prescribed in Australia, which is another really positive sign. I mean, we're not just a Canadian company. We also do work with Cortexa, our joint venture with Viterra Health in Australia. And so having that first patient dose is also really critical. I will say, because I promised that I would say this, that the dose that was prescribed came out of inventory that we manufactured for an organization called Mind Medicine Australia. And Mind Medicine Australia is a charity, but they provided the dose and the training to the clinic in question, which is Monarch Clinics. And so that's how that sort of all came together. And the other thing, Shane has been really run off his feet, I think, as our operations lead, in that there's not a lot of there's a lot of folks who sort of say that they're going to do stuff, but there's not a lot of folks who actually execute. And so Shane, do you want to talk a little bit about what we've seen in the market out there?
Yeah, certainly. As a small company, we're very conscious of making sure that we're not overextended on any part of what we do from an operational perspective, be it manufacturing, active ingredient, i.e. the API of MDMA, all the way to making sure we have enough capsules completed and ready to go, and to be able to supply into a demand plan that we understand. However, as this is a very new market, a very new value chain, and a lot of people in different jurisdictions with different regulatory requirements are looking to move on this. It doesn't, and I'm going to be very selfish about this, it doesn't help me from a demand planning perspective. We're not making Nike here, and we know, okay, we're going to increase our production by 1/4. We could have huge percentages and swings in relation to demand plan. So we're trying to manage that well. Certainly, I think we've done a good job at that. What we're seeing, though, putting pressure on that is where people have been promised. So, for example, in other jurisdictions, they've been promised product to be able to start their either clinical trials or their actual clinical use in market. And certainly, they seem to have been left wanting for product on a correct timeline, because this is difficult, to manage your production for anybody. But it's nice to see that we're being able to step in and help those in certain circumstances, again, putting a patient first approach. But obviously, it puts demand on myself and the team here in relation to understanding demand planning and getting it right, because you want to allocate resources correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shane and his team have done a really, really good job, and frankly, like a bit of a tough environment, just trying to roll with the punches and make sure to get material to patients. Ultimately, this is all about patients. One of my sort of annoyances in this industry is how little we hear about the patients and the patient experience, but really, really important to keep patient centered in everything that we do. And it's something at PharmAla we talk about all the time, because ultimately that's what we're doing here, right? Like, we're generating materials that are going to be used to treat patients, hopefully help patients. And then of course, the sort of the convergence of all this is moving towards a model where now, with our controlled substances license and with the inventory that we've generated, we can actually gather data in a really, really cost-effective manner. And I don't know that a lot of people have sort of understood this yet, but one of the really, really cool things that is going on right now in this space is, you have something that doesn't really happen very often. You have a drug which is not yet approved, although we'll talk about what's going on with MAPS in the United States and the approval process there. But in Canada and Australia, this is an unapproved drug, but the government has seen the clinical evidence and has seen the patient need and has authorized some amount of use, whether through authorized prescriber or through special access here in Canada. And late last year, we announced a partnership with the University of Calgary to gather that real world evidence and to package it together into a data package. And so that is, in many ways, that is, I don't want to say it's equivalent to a phase 3 clinical trial. It is an alternate data gathering step, but it's much more cost effective, because not only are we gathering this data, and now we can talk to prescribers with our controlled substances license, but this is very, very valuable data about how these treatments roll out in the real world. And the real world's messy, right? It's not like a clinical trial. You don't have controls. We did a webinar last year, and one of the I don't know if you were listening in on that one, Shane, but one of the clinicians on that webinar basically said, "Oh yeah, we did a treatment and we did it virtually." And as far as I know, that's the first time that MDMA has ever been administered through a virtual therapy session. It's never happened in clinical trial. So gathering that data on how this rolls out in the real world is hugely, hugely important. But it also means that we can gather that data and we can submit it to regulators, which is, that's huge. It's big.
It also has a huge benefit for helping us at the forefront of this treatment and with this molecule to be able to obtain that data and lessons from prescribers here in Canada. I think that's going to be vitally important as we interact with prescribers in Australia and elsewhere in the world, being able to be in a position to take data and lessons learned from prescribers here in Australia under the SAP program and apply it to people in particular with PTSD and understand how this operates and understand the prescriber's perspective on this. I think it will be, it's pretty cutting edge data gathering and pretty cutting edge treatment information.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone listening in, if you'd like to ask questions, you can ask them through the Q&A. We're going to get started on the questions in just a few minutes. I did want to just sort of preface the Q&A portion with some of the milestones that we anticipate seeing in the next couple of months. So as I think most people are aware, Lykos Therapeutics, which was previously known as MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, in December, they submitted their full new drug application to the Food and Drug Administration in the US. And frankly, in the next couple of weeks, we should see from FDA an indication of when they expect to have an answer on that application. So FDA has a choice between fast tracking this, and that would be a 6-month review period, or the regular track, which is a 10-month review period. And we're going to find out what's going to happen there relatively quickly. But there's lots of really good progress all over the world now. Obviously, we mentioned the MDMA treatment that happened in Australia recently. Clarion Clinics, which is one of our customers, recently announced that they've now been authorized to start issuing prescriptions under the authorized prescriber scheme. And then in April, the EU is hosting a large forum for regulators and trade groups on psychedelic medicine, the regulations around it. So lots of really interesting and good progress on that happening really all over the world. So with that, I mean, the point of this webinar is to give everyone out there a chance to ask their questions. So please do write them in the chat. And I'm going to ask our friend Conway to start reading out some of these questions, and Shannon and I will answer them as they come in.
Absolutely. The first one is coming from an anonymous user. I'm curious about the onshore manufacturing in Australia, if it has commenced.
So we have not yet commenced onshore manufacturing in Australia, but we anticipate starting that in the next couple of months. As you'll recall, the terms of the JV was structured so that at first Cortexa could get our inventory, the previously manufactured inventory from PharmAla, and then could move into manufacturing as the market need sort of developed in Australia. A lot of really good reasons to manufacture in Australia. One of the biggest being, I say this endlessly, but I'll keep saying it, import-export is really hard. And we've put a lot of pressure on Shane to land a lot of deliveries over the last couple of months, and he's done a brilliant job at it. But onshoring that manufacturing, it lowers our costs. It brings us closer to the customer, closer to the patient, again, patient-centric. And so I think that's really, really critical. Shane, anything else you want to mention about that?
Yeah, I think it's should be remembered that there has been products sent, our products sent to Australia, so finished product, and also API. So we feel that we're in a very good position to supply in the next couple of months as Australian patients come online with our product. We have obviously done a lot of work in setting up for onshore manufacturing in Australia. We've done the audit assessments to where we need to be. We understand the systems and the processes and the quality requirements very well. So from that perspective, I think they're ready, pretty much ready to go in the grand scheme of things. But I'm pretty confident that there's enough product, finished product in Australia right now to help, support the first number of months at least, considering the rate of rollout that we're seeing. Remember, we've just seen one, happen in Australia. So certainly, I think we're in a very good position, and our partners in Cortex are delighted not only to have finished product, but API on hand to start manufacturing whenever it's required.
And I just see that there's another question on here around whether we will need to import more material for Cortexa or whether they have enough. Look, we will do what is necessary to make sure that we don't run out of product. So if we need to import more to Australia, we will. I think we've been very, very clear that it's our preference to just get to manufacturing in Australia. But the biggest priority at the end of the day is making sure that there are not patients, deserving patients, who are missing out on treatments because of inventory bottlenecks. So if we need to import, we will, with the goal, of course, of getting manufacturing going as a major priority for us.
Again, demand plan is a challenge for everybody in the space. No one knows how big and how quick the ramp up will be, but we're, I believe, very well positioned in Australia right now with both finished product and API ingredient, MDMA powder, essentially, to encapsulate whenever we feel fit. So we've done a good job at managing both the reliability of supply for demand, which is unknown at this point. We've obviously planned it out in some degree, but we feel very confident that there won't be any patients left wanting in Australia for our product in any time in the near future or in the longer term once we decide to pull the trigger on, or Cortex decide to pull the trigger on manufacturing.
Yeah. Conway, do you want to take us to the next question?
Absolutely. This one is regards to their trial in Calgary. Has our Heroic Hearts trial begun?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. We've been treating a number of patients every month since May of, or I should say, we haven't been treating them. We've been providing drug for the treatment of patients since May of last year. So there's been a number of patients that have gone through 1 or 2 dosages. I don't know that anybody's done all 3 doses in the protocol yet. But yeah, we've started data gathering, and really, I think a big priority for us now that we have our controlled substances license is starting to talk to prescribers, starting to talk to clinicians, and really like making them aware of what this type of therapy is all about, what they can expect, and what potential benefits might exist for patients, with the goal, obviously, of trying to increase the number of patients, if they are deserving, in the opinion of the clinicians, and they meet the qualifications of the special access program.
I would also add, I think it's vitally important that people realize that this is a clinical trial that is run by the University of Calgary, essentially. We obviously are partners in the process, but at the end of the day, we certainly won't be interacting with the prescribers as part of that research. It's really between, understanding, getting an insight into the prescribers' processes and opinions, and how it worked for them as a prescriber, and for their, how did they see improvements for University of Calgary to bring that to publication and to release those results. At the end of the day, I think it's vitally important that gap between the prescribers and any drug manufacturer is well maintained.
Yeah, we don't hold patient data within PharmAla, for very good reason. We have pharmacovigilance agreements, so if there's any adverse events, of course, as a drug product manufacturer, we are obligated to get that information submitted to Health Canada where it is deemed appropriate. But on confidential patient information, we don't hold it, and that's part of the reason why we're working with University of Calgary to gather that data. And they're very well equipped for it. Leah Mayo, who's the lead researcher there, Dr. Leah Mayo. I actually just saw her this morning. I am in Calgary right now, and she's a brilliant researcher. She knows exactly how to do this properly, safely, correctly. And so really the job for us is just make sure that there's supply for patients, and then let the University of Calgary researchers do their work. Next question.
Awesome. How will we fund the clinical trials?
So we talked about this a lot, right? So for University of Calgary, that's an observational trial. It's not a clinical trial. So for that, we're not funding that in any way. For our own novel molecules, we are definitely looking at a whole bunch of different funding mechanisms. We have actually completed the design of the ALA 002 clinical trial. We worked with a researcher named Adam Guastella over at the University of Sydney, also in Australia, to develop that protocol, and it is complete. In terms of funding, I think look, there's two ways to do this. The first way is just raise a bunch of money and do it. You know what I mean? Hire the people, pay the University of Sydney or whatever clinical trial site we decide on, and just do the trial. That's fine. There are some drawbacks to it though, and one of them, quite frankly, is we're a small team and we're not specialized in clinical research. We're specialized in preclinical research. Harpreet and her team do a lot of preclinical. We're specialized in drug discovery and drug design. We're not specialized in clinical research. And so building that capacity in-house is challenging and expensive. The other option, which we're pursuing very aggressively, is out-licensing with large pharma companies. And in the pharma industry, this happens all the time. So you develop a new drug, you get it to a point where it's ready to go for phase 2, and then you seek partners with significant experience in clinical trial management design, and you basically work a licensing deal with that company to do that work. And I can't go into details about what's going on that front. What I can say is Harpreet and I have been working diligently. I think it's public knowledge that we were at the JP Morgan conference in San Francisco just last month, meeting with representatives of the pharmaceutical industry. So, if I had my choice, I would pick that option. Stay in our lane, continue to specialize in what we are very, very good at, and work with folks who are very, very good in what they do to accomplish those trials.
Awesome. I'm going to tie in two questions together. What other benefits does the Health Canada license allow PharmAla Biotech to explore? And how many other companies have a similar license in Canada?
Okay, do you want me to take that, Nick?
Please, yeah.
I'll take it in reverse. So basically, the license that we obtained, there are many organizations that have a similar dealer's license. However, the license itself has to be specified. Once you're dealing with controlled substance, you actually have to specify on the license the specific molecule that you're working with. So while someone could have a dealer's license, there's very few, I believe, that would have MDMA listed on their license. Now, you can also, once you have a license, you can apply to Health Canada to add a controlled substance to your license, but there's a set of requirements that are that go with that. So it's not necessarily a numbers game in relation to how many licenses there are that are similar, but it's what is permitted within that license, i.e. the conditions on the license. What are the benefits? Certainly, as we've outlined, the benefits range from being able to proactively, sell, act, and that definition of selling is interacting with other appropriately licensed individuals, organizations, being able to work with people who, doctors who are prescribers, hospitals, etc., allows us to be a much stronger position to be involved in clinical research as well. Certainly, there's options around Section 56s that it opens up as well. So I think really what it does is it puts us on the right footing to be able to continue growing and understanding the patient needs.
Absolutely. And again, like you'll hear me say this a lot, but keeping patient centered is really critical in all this. At the end of the day, there's no more persuasive argument in favor of continued regulatory change and movement in this space than positive patient outcomes. And so we have to do everything we can to keep that front and center. Conway?
Awesome. I'm going to lump some questions in together. Do we have any talks with pharma companies on ALA? And will trials for ALA start in the first quarter?
I can't guarantee that the trials will start in the first quarter. There's lots of work that goes into a clinical trial. We're doing the best that we can to move this forward, but I think everyone who's sort of aware of this space has seen timelines slip for like every single company out there. And in terms of funding those trials, as I said, our goal is to work with large pharma to out-license some of our novel IP assets, and to make sure that we are going into these trials with partners. And so, if I am given a choice between, waiting for a few more months and landing a really great partner, or just trying to go it ourselves just to hit an arbitrary timeline, I think the best outcomes for shareholders, for the company, and for patients is to work with, the best possible partners. And for us, I think we've proven that we are capable of doing that. Cortexa is a great case study in a best-in-class market entry with the best possible partners done on a great timeline. And so this is a different type of commercial transaction, but that's the kind of success that we want to replicate.
Awesome. On the topic of partnerships, can you elaborate on an eventual partnership you are still pursuing? And what about a partnership with Otsuka is another question.
So I can't. One of the requirements of a non-disclosure agreement is you can't talk about any non-disclosure agreement. No, look, we're talking to a whole range of partners. We're working hard. I'm not going to comment on any specific companies. I'm not going to comment on any specific deals. I think that you guys know what the goals are for the business. We've elaborated those very, very clearly, and we're pursuing those goals.
Awesome. Based on the successful Q1 financials, are we seeing similar trends for demand or greater in Q2? Anything you can elaborate on operations increasing capacity would be appreciated.
Again, one of the requirements for a publicly traded company is we can't talk about financials until they're released to the broader market. So I'm not going to talk about like broad trends. I'm not going to talk about what's going to happen in the next quarter financials. What I will say is, and I said this earlier on the webinar, I think, set expectations at the right level. It's early days in this industry, right? First MDMA treatment in Australia just happened. So it's going to take some time for things to sort of level out and stabilize. It's going to be choppy, but the goal, as long as we all keep that goal in mind, is to increase our capacity, increase our throughput, increase the number of patients that are benefiting from these types of treatments. And as long as we do that, and I think we have, right? I think the numbers that we've released show that we have. I think everyone's going to be very, very pleased with the results. Shane, anything you want to add?
Certainly. I think maybe the questioner hadn't heard the start of the call. I think, from a demand plan perspective, I think you're seeing it be not very clear on when and how demand is going to hit. So we're trying to manage our resources accordingly and correctly. The worst situation you want to be in is to have, 3x too many the capsules on hand that we would want to have, and them going, they essentially go expiring. So then you've got, capital wrapped up in inventory, which is not good application. So we're trying very, very hard to understand what the questioner is asking, is looking at demand plan. Certainly, I think it's interesting just from a timing perspective. As you said, Nick, there's just been the first prescription in Australia, but there is a real, clear intent for the Australian market in particular to want to be successful as a whole. You've seen just the closing very recently in the last number of days of the TGA's consultation on the quality standards required that they will put in place for psilocybin and MDMA. So certainly we've been involved in those discussions. So, that hasn't even been established yet in Australia. So just, I think to reiterate Nick's point, We don't have a crystal ball. We're not making Nikes where we can have 30 years of understanding of where demand's going to, the trends and demands. I think we're looking at opportunities. We're making sure we're rightly positioned, rightly placed, and executing in a manner that will ensure that we are well positioned to take advantage of all the opportunities that exist around the world in this space.
Yeah, there's a number of questions in the chat about other markets beyond Canada, Australia, and the United States to open up. And maybe I'll address all of them sort of all together. So we don't know in advance if a government's going to change their minds on regulation. We do engage heavily with a number of governments because this is part of the work that we do, right? Like, in addition to my work with PharmAla, I'm the board chair for PsyCan, which is the trade association for psychedelics companies in Canada. I already mentioned that there's a major meeting happening at the EU to talk about psychedelics regulation in April. We obviously, as PsyCan, we very much hope to participate in that. I'm certainly planning to be in Amsterdam for that meeting if they allow industry representation, which I believe that they will. But broadly speaking, some of the countries that we've talked about in the past, Brazil is very interesting, the EU, the UK, and each of these countries has their own regulatory systems. Each has their own sort of advocate groups within those countries. But right now, our focus is, we know that we can enter a new market if we need to. We did it in Australia, we can do it again. Our focus is on growing the markets in those countries which already allow for the use of these molecules. And that's right now, Canada and Australia, where we're at.
And regulatory change takes time. Look at any other sector you want, whether, I've been hearing for 10 years, well, nearly 8 years now, that, legalization of cannabis in Germany is going to happen any day soon. So obviously you want to manage your expectations around regulatory change because it's subject to a whole host of political, pressures, and nothing's ever completely guaranteed in this space. So again, I think we're positioning ourselves in a way where we can actually expand markets that we know exist, that are solid, that we have partners in, and that we certainly want to get our product into the hands of prescribers and patients so that we can get that data feedback from different markets as quick as possible.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's also a number of questions about FDA timelines on the MAPS approval, and then our sort of work in the United States. So I'll remind everyone that last year, our materials, our Lineo MDMA capsules, were accepted by the US FDA for use in clinical trials in the United States. So we already supply clinical trials in the US, and we will continue to do so as clinical trials come online. I don't think that the clinical trial space with MDMA is over. We're not there yet. There's a lot of clinical trials in the pipeline, including just recently the VA, the Veterans Affairs Administration in the United States, recently announced a large grant funding envelope for research on PTSD with MDMA. So obviously we would love to participate in that and love to be suppliers for that research when those grants are awarded, because they haven't even been awarded yet. Grant timelines take a long time. For anyone who has been around in academia, it's a long haul, it's a slog. But I think we've proven that we've been very, very successful in working with researchers. And to Shane's previous point, developing that reputation of customer service for our research customers is critical. There's always going to be somebody who pops up who says, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it quick. Don't worry, I'll do it quick and cheap. But what we've seen a lot of the time is those people pop up and then they say they're going to do stuff and then they don't execute. And then researchers are left scrambling. Cortexa is speaking to a researcher in Australia right now who basically had a deal in place for supply. And then that supply fell through, and they've been waiting for a full year to start their clinical trial. And so you can imagine the cost involved in keeping researchers just sitting around and waiting. So a lot of the work that Shane does now is sort of hopping into those discussions and trying to very quickly sort of alleviate that demand, and make sure that we actually land material and get that research going. In terms of the MAPS approval, As I've said, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to hear from FDA on what the timeline is, 6 months to 10 months. Keep in mind, it's actually going to be a little bit longer than that. Usually during the new drug application process, they're going to come back to the sponsor company with questions. And each time they ask a question, it's like speed chess. You stop the clock and you sit and they don't count time waiting for a response as time towards their application deadline. And so, if they say 6 months, maybe 8. If they say 10 months, maybe 12, sometimes longer. It was very, very difficult for us to predict in advance how the regulators are going to react to this. I do think it's positive that MAPS has a breakthrough therapy designation, because if you look at the historical record, most drugs are not approved, but FDA has approved actually slightly more than 50% of all the drugs submitted that have breakthrough therapy designation. So sort of the wind is in our sails from that perspective. Conway, any other questions you want to read out for us?
Absolutely. This user is curious how or if the Numinous MAPS deal will affect PharmAla or the industry as a whole.
I don't know. Really hard to say. I will say, we speak to Numinous often. Numinous not only does work with MAPS, they also are an SAP provider in Canada, and we've provided materials for a number of SAPs that Numinous has done at their clinic site. So hope to continue working with them as they move forward. Glad to see that they got funding, because that's really, really important. Glad to see some money flowing back into the sector, because I think, as with most of these things, a rising tide does lift all ships.
Awesome. From Lucas, a projection on how many patients we are expecting in 2024 and 2025.
Geez, Lucas, I wish I could tell you, man.
I wish I knew that.
That would make our lives a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if we knew that, my job would be, super easy. We're basically ensuring that along our value chain, no matter what the number of patients we have or that we be able to access, we will be in a position to supply the value chain at the right points, at the right times, for the right regulatory systems. So whether that's SAP in Canada here, we're well positioned to, to supply to that. We do that on an ongoing basis. We have Australia. We're now well established. We got product on the ground at various formats. We can pull the trigger on manufacturing if we see demand start to ramp up, or we can export what we have products here available within probably 4 to 6 weeks. We can move product pretty quickly. So we're certainly well positioned. But to be able to answer your question, well, we do our own estimates. We have ranges. We're trying to do this in a logical manner and make sure that we don't overspend or underspend to service those patients.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be the last question. Maybe we'll get 2 more in, but there's a question about how we're educating therapists and what tools we're providing to them to streamline their processes into SAP. And on that, I will mention again, the controlled substance license we are granted does offer us some more tools in speaking with, clinicians, providers. There are other groups working on this as well. So MAPS Canada, which is not the same organization as MAPS in the United States. It is a charity here in Canada. So MAPS Canada recently released an SAP guide. And one of the things we were really gratified to see in that guide was that PharmAla Biotech was listed as the only provider for MDMA for SAP available today. And we are working on in-house tools to help clinicians make their applications and educate them about the nature of these treatments. All of those tools have to be held very, very closely by us, right? We don't want to breach the terms of our license. And so those aren't available to the general public. Those are available solely for practitioners who are licensed. But yeah, we're actively working to try and improve the education and the availability of information for those clinicians who do want to work with these molecules. And let's see, what about here?
Do you want to touch on the Israel one, considering?
Yeah. So look, for those who don't know, I'm Jewish. I don't think that's a secret. Certainly, I haven't kept it a secret. So the situation in the Middle East is definitely sort of front row center in my mind. There's a lot of work being done right now to attempt group therapy for folks who were victims in the October 7th attacks in Israel. I'm sorry to say, but there's just like a ton of PTSD right now. They were hugely traumatic events. There's hugely traumatic events going on in Gaza right now as well, right? And you know, regardless of anything else, you know, we don't pick and choose. Trauma is trauma, and you know, patients are patients. But we are in discussion with a number of groups in Israel. If we can help in any way, we've made clear that we're available to help. And you know, as you know, sort of those discussions come to fruition, we'll be to comment more publicly. But I think you know, a lot of work to be done. Very, very difficult to work with these types of controlled molecules in functionally like war zones, right? Not that all of Israel is a war zone, but you know, there is an ongoing war in the Middle East and now in several parts of the Middle East. We also had a number of discussions with groups in Ukraine at the start of that conflict. But you know, I'll be blunt. I would not want to be accused of, you know, taking advantage of a conflict like that, right? Like that's not the goal of the company. That's not what we're setting out to do. So these types of initiatives, they have to be sort of driven by folks in those countries. And you know, we're happy to help. We would like to help. I think that there's a ton of good that we can do in places like Ukraine or Israel or Gaza, but those have to be initiatives that local governments sort of decide to embark upon, and then we are there as a supplier, and of course, like happy to, you know, provide product on a low or no cost basis to do that kind of good work.
I think we have pretty unique insights into Israel in particular. You know, I was there, you know, over the new year and into the new year. Certainly, you know, we have a lot of contacts personally and family-wise into the healthcare system in Israel. So we're watching the space, but I think we're also, as Nick said, we're very conscious of the fact that, you know, those kinds of treatments and systems, support structures, etc., really need to come from within the country, not any pharmaceutical company outside the country.
Absolutely. And with that, I think we're gonna end things here. I know that there are a number of other questions. As always, you can reach out to us at investors@pharmala.ca and send us your questions. Like on this webinar, I can't promise we're going to be able to answer them all, but we do really try to keep an ongoing conversation going with our investors. We do try to keep you guys apprised of things that are going on with the company and broadly in the market. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thanks for joining us. And we hope to be speaking to you soon.